So the next stage is just to kind of put the plan together. What are the constraints? What kind of data do you need? And how do you collect the data? The two big constraints are time and money. You never have enough time to do what you want to do. I was at a conference the other day where they talked about we live in the now economy, where it's if you make a decision, I want to see the results this week and I want to see the revision next week. You don't have a lot of time to think things through, to ponder. So you need to be able to act quickly, which limits the kind of information you get. And then just the resources. And in business, a lot of times, resources is a code word for money. If anybody ever says, we need more resources, we need more money, that's what we're saying. And we talked about that. It's not just the salaries, but it's the time and on both sides. There's the collecting the data, analyzing the data, and then setting up the decision, setting up the need for the decision, hiring the research firm, or authorizing the research. And then last, managerial. Is you need to have somebody on your side that is making sure that the research supports a business decision, is there to interpret the findings, and is there to implement the decisions, is there to oversee the process to make sure that the research is done properly, and that requires somebody's attention. I don't want to share this because this would be inappropriate, but I will share it. But I was in a situation recently where a party that I'm not going to name had gotten a grant to do some really cool stuff. And the person, not me, who might have been me, got the grant and then said, okay, let's do the stuff. And then the feedback was, just because you have the money doesn't mean we have the people. So it's the managerial resources to make sure that that's done. And then, what data do you need? If you're doing exploratory data, it could be quantitative or qualitative. Qualitative things like observation, focus groups. Are you familiar with focus groups? This is where you get people in a room, sit around a table, and you talk about a subject. And then if you want to be really cool, you have people in another room looking through a one-way mirror with television cameras monitoring the conversation. Kind of cool. And for descriptive research, that is typically quantitative, numbers. Most business research is cross-sectional research, which means that you do the survey at one point in time. Longitudinal research is when you're looking for changes in the parameters that you're looking at over time. It's very rare to do longitudinal research because it's expensive. You have to do the same survey or the same data collection more than once over time, and unless it's really important to know how things are changing, it's not a good investment. Where we see longitudinal research all the time is in political campaigns, and we're in a campaign season right now, and it's like you get every week the polls, and this candidate is up in the polls, this candidate, that's longitudinal research. Just looking at where we are over time. And then causal research is much more fussy. For causal research, you need to have a formal experiment, and in order to be a formal experiment, you need to meet all of these conditions. There are no exceptions. No substitutions on this menu. So first off, you need to have a theoretical framework. So if we were going to think or try to prove that ice cream cones cause violent crime, our theoretical framework might be that the sugar acts in the violence-prone section of the brain, and that's what causes the violence. And then we set up a hypothesis: the more sugar, the more violent crime. And then we have our dependent variable, which would be the outcome, the violent crime. Our independent variable would be the sugar levels, which we manipulate. And then we would run our experiment. You need to have a probability sample. And most people, when you think of a probability sample, think of random sample. And a random sample is the most common kind of a probability sample. But a probability sample just means that every member of the population has a known chance of being included in the survey, in the sample. So a variation, very common variation, is something called a stratified random sample. where I will random sample the population, but if I really wanted to know what's going on with women between the ages of 1835, I might sample twice as many women between the ages of 1835, even though that group is twice as likely to be in the survey, so it's not really random, because you have a known probability twice as much as anybody else. I can account for those differences statistically. And then you need to have a control group. Have people that aren't subjected to experimental manipulation to show that what you're doing is different than what would happen without. Yes?
How do companies get away with manipulating the information, though?
How do...
In regards to, like, for instance, sugar companies lobbying,
Okay, so the comment is, so how do companies get away with manipulating the information? And if you remember, we talked about pseudo-research. That's pseudo-research. It's not research to inform a business decision with two alternative courses of action. It's research that's done to support a decision that's already been made. And the decision is that sugar is good for you. And you can bet that any research that's sponsored by the Sugar Institute will show you that sugar is good for you, and it actually counteracts the cancer that you get from smoking. And everybody knows that's only chocolate that does that. So this is the most rigorous approach, and again, for you've heard for medical trials, is if I want to have a treatment that's, especially if it's life-threatening, I want to make sure that it's really cause and effect as opposed to just correlation. Many times we're not able to have all of the conditions of an experiment. And in those situations, we have to do what's called a quasi-experiment, which means that we do our best, but we have to relax one or more of the conditions. For example, if I wanted to do a survey about environmental consciousness. Who here is environmentally conscious? Okay, none. Oh, a few, okay. I was going to say, all right, business majors. But most of us are. So how do you know if somebody is in the group of? You really can't say. So there's not a chance of getting a probability sample, because if I don't know the size of the population, I don't know that everybody in the population has a chance of being included in the sample. So I might have to relax that condition. Another one is for control groups, and this is done many times now, thankfully, in medical research, where if the alternative to the treatment is somebody dying, we might not have a control group because it would be wrong to have people die in order to prove that this treatment works. And there were some horrific experiments that were done back, gosh, in the 20s, the Tuskegee experiments, where they were testing syphilis treatments on low-income African-American men and had a control group where some people got the treatment, some people didn't get the treatment, and we saw who got better and who died. That was like wrong. Well, and thankfully, because of that, pretty much all research today, all academic research, has to go through a formal review to make sure that the rights of the subjects are being taken care of and that there's a legitimate need for the research. But again, if I have a life-threatening, a cure for AIDS, it would be unethical for me to withhold the treatment from somebody in order to prove the experiment, so I wouldn't have the control group. That would be a quasi-experiment.